Hi, my name's Luke. I'm building an educational social media startup company called Noetic. And boy, is it hard. But it's a lot easier when I have good friends like Robert Schut to team teach courses. And today we're going to be wrapping up our discussion of Soren Kierkegaard's The Point of View from my work as an author. You can see what copy we're using here. We're using the Harper and Brothers New York edition. Translated by Walter Lowry, if you've been following along. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see this incredibly cool finger puppet that Bob got me for for Christmas/birthday, even though I'm highly skeptical of those fertility holidays and pagan rituals now. But I will accept this Kierkegaard finger puppet with great joy. I now have someone to talk to when Bob's not around. I can just put him on my hand, and now I have a friend. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah.
It was our pleasure.
Yeah. I look forward to many conversations with Puppet Soren. Well, that took a turn for the weird real quick.
It did.
Well, what else would you expect from me? So, what are we going to be doing today?
Well, we're going to be finishing up. We're going to be, last week we left off, we were talking about the governance, Kierkegaard's idea of governance, meaning how God kind of rules over the political powers, rules over the world in general, really. And we're going to kind of pick it up there and kind of work our way to the end from there. So I'll start at that point. Saying that he was very much aware that he was under the governance of God in throughout his life, at least through his later life anyway, we know of. He saw his life as a very temporary thing, and that it could end at any year, any month, even any day.
I really appreciated that about this part of the book because he was totally convinced that every day was going to be his last, or every year was going to be his last, and that just made him work all the harder. And I sort of appreciate that perspective. Yeah,
and he really died at a young age. I forgot, how old was he again? He was barely 40.
I believe he was 43, if memory serves me correctly. I should check. But I don't know if you know this or other people know the interesting story. I think he was pretty convinced that he was going to die on his 33rd birthday.
Yeah.
Or before he turned 34.
Yeah.
And so the story goes that I've been told, and this could just be an old wives' tale, is that when he woke up and turned 34 years old, he went to the town hall to check his birth records to see if there had been some kind of mistake. He thought his divine mission wasn't going to last beyond the same number of years that Jesus had.
Yeah. Well, he was born in 1813, died 1855, so that would make him 42.
42, yeah. 42.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to read. I don't like to read too lengthy passages here, but I'm going to read something a little bit longer than I normally do because it's so filled with good information. This is at the bottom of page 88 and the top of page 89 in the notes. I'm one of those people who actually reads the footnotes. So it says, I have endeavored to express the thought that to employ the category race to indicate what it is to be a man, and especially as an indication of the highest attainment, is a misunderstanding and a mere paganism, because the race, mankind, differs from an animal race, not merely by its general superiority as a race, but by the human characteristics that every single individual within the race, not merely distinguished individuals, but every individual is more than the race. This follows from the relation of the individual to God, and essentially, this is Christianity, whose category, the individual, in quotes, is so much derided by this highly lauded Christian age. For to relate oneself to God is a far higher thing than to be related to the race. and through the race to God. This is what I have endeavored to express. Really very powerful stuff here, and it gives away a lot of what's going on in the mind of Kierkegaard. He is totally for the individual. And here he compares the individual to the race. And I'm thinking here, as I'm reading this, about the race being related to God. If he's actually speaking about Judaism kind of here a little bit, that how the Jews were related to God through their race as being a Jew, the chosen race of God. And now he's saying now we are individuals, and each one of us is individually chosen by God. And that's the power of Christianity as compared to the power of Judaism. I know you probably, I'm not sure if you are a footnote reader, but at least while I was reading that, did that sound like what the message you get from that is?
Yeah. I mean, I need to read these footnotes more closely, so I'm glad you brought it to my attention. Yeah, and I think that's totally consistent with the message of the gospel, right? Is that that Christ was rejected by Judaism of that time. Yeah. And so then the message went to the Gentiles, which is everybody else. Yeah. And so there is kind of this, getting to some very interesting eschatological stuff about the role that the Jews play during the tribulation and end times and whatnot. Because God's not done with them, right? Doesn't he ultimately have to come back and work with them again? And this is part of what the two witnesses do, right? Is that they sort of communicate the gospel in a language that they can understand.
Well, we get into different
we'll get
ideas
into the weeds
on
about
that. Yeah. Some people feel that that's necessary. Others feel like it's already been done. So it depends on which school you're with. So
I don't want to put this idea out there that God is done with the Jews. Like God is still working through them, still very much wants to win them, and really every human being. Yeah.
Well, the way Paul puts it is that the branch was broken off so that the branch of the Gentiles could be
grafted on.
Grafted. Yes, what I saw. Grafted back onto the tree. So we, as Gentiles, are enjoying what we're enjoying only because the failure of the Jews. So at some time in the future, there may be a revival of Judaism. Now, I wanted to say something else about that too. That sometimes this causes me personally in my faith a problem, because sometimes I tend to go into the individual at the cost of the community. Sometimes I almost see myself in contention against the community, which I don't necessarily like, but sometimes I just find myself there. That it's so hard to be part of the community, at least for me. And I think Kierkegaard shared that same thing. And how about yourself? I kind of know where you're coming from, but just to let the other people know.
Oh yeah, Bob. I'm a real hit at parties. The air quotes community loves me. I have an adoring public wherever I go, and churches are just begging me to be a part of their congregation. Yeah.
You have speaking engagements all the time
Yeah, no one even asked me. I'm booked through 2022. Everybody's just demanding to hear my thoughts on everything. So yeah, I don't know. I don't see the Christian message. I mean, even in the embodiment in Christ, is one about a lot of numbers, right? Mm-hmm. Christ was obviously very antagonistic to the community, right? He was obviously very much at odds with the clerics and the priests of his day. So he whipped them to drive them out of the temple, right?
Yeah.
And it ultimately culminated in his death because he wouldn't recant on what they considered to be blasphemy and heresy. So I don't know. But at the same time, this is something to struggle with. I mean, at the same time, Jesus fed the multitudes, right? So
and we take a look at Paul. Paul really tried to reach out to the community and create Christian communities. But the reason people may not realize this, the reason most of the letters were written is because he had so much trouble with the communities that he had to keep correcting them. And that's the whole reason those letters were written. They weren't letters to say, hey, guys, you're doing great. Just wanted to give you guys a high five and let you know. It was that, he starts it out, yeah, you guys are doing good, but here's what I've got against you. And then he'd go on and on and on and on. So he wanted to be a community-type person, but I think it was very difficult for him. So I kind of see that conflict. And, maybe, I don't know if that's just part of having a spiritual life is being conflicted. I don't know.
Well, definitely. I mean, Kierkegaard would agree, right? I mean, that's what the whole book of Fear and Trembling is about, right?
Yeah.
Is to try to weather complex moral, religious dilemmas with faith.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that ultimately that one's faith grows as the result of being placed in those problematized dilemmas.
Yeah.
So,
but and I think another issue that we see today, Luke, maybe among believers is believing that their church is on the internet, feeling that they've had such bad experiences in the community churches. Now they've formed a new community on the internet.
Do you think that's wholly bad? Because I struggle with that. Like I personally don't attend a church right now because I live in the middle of nowhere, and I try to think about what would be a good church environment for me. But for me, church is a 24/7 gig. So every day I'm listening to sermons, and there's a pastor out there near you who has an online church in San Jose, Dr. Gene Kim, who I have been listening to lately, and there's a guy down in Alabama who I listen to a lot, and then there's these there's this Puritan audiobooks channel where I'm constantly listening to sermons. So it raises very fundamental questions about what's the point of being part of a Christian community when we live in this digital age where we can get this incredible theological training and sermons just by going online.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And sometimes I wonder if this is the true invisible church that is alluded to in the Bible sometimes, that it does.
I think that when we go to real community, flesh and blood churches, there is conflict. But I think that's how God wants us to grow. So it's like we have to force ourselves into the conflict. And that's what's so difficult. It's easy to kind of retreat away from the church. I try not to do that. I still try to struggle. I still have my Bible study, which is like a little community within a community. But it's a struggle. It's a struggle. And I don't see that as something that's going away. I think that's always going to stay there. So I would never tell anybody to, and Paul says, do not forego the meeting of the brethren. In other words, you go out among the brethren and meet with the brethren. Even if it's a small group, though. We don't have to go to a mega church. We don't have to go to a large church. But even if we just have meetings in our homes, the physical contact with one another, I think, is important. The flesh and blood.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not gonna dispute that.
Okay.
I need to be better about it.
Now he compares himself. This is kind of interesting here. He compares himself to a stringed instrument, Except he.
Oh, this was I love this. I love this so much.
Except he thinks he has an extra string on his guitar called the Christian string.
Yeah. You know what that reminds me of? Well, it's like he's like a spiritual prog rocker. I don't know if you ever listened to progressive rock music. When I did music all the time, those virtuoso musicians would always have like way more than they needed, and like they took great pleasure in being able to make sounds and things like that no other genre of music could make. You know, they would have like the guitar with a keyboard attached to it at the same time, or they'd play a 12-string guitar rather than a 6-1, or like a double neck guitar. And that's why I like this so much, is that it's almost like Kierkegaard saying, I'm like the prog rock of Christian evangelists.
But this gives me the idea. I was thinking, what does he mean by that extra string? And I'm thinking he's talking about something that goes beyond the normal physical world, this spirituality that the Christian is supposed to have. When he goes out and he evangelizes, or just merely is a Christian and behaves like a Christian, he has this extra string, this extra notes that he can hit that nobody else can hit. It was those who were in the simple classes that united against him, and it wasn't really the upper class. So he felt that he was exposed to the hatred of the common people because he did not act as though he was superior to them. So when Kierkegaard,
why do you think he was exposed to their hatred because he wouldn't act? Do they feel like that was disingenuous? Like, because they're like, did he feel like he wasn't being authentic by trying to sort of blend in with the common folk?
That could have been it, but what I've noticed is that I think that the common people, the average person, likes the idea of their leader looking superior, whether it's wearing robes or crowns or titles or whatever. They really like the idea of playing the role of the superior person. And Kierkegaard didn't play that role. And therefore, he was vulnerable to the anger of the crowds. They could take their frustrations out on him, whereas they would leave somebody else alone because they went around using the title, doctor, or using different titles, or wearing a robe or whatever, if it was a pastor or something, or a white collar, whatever it is. It just seems to play a very psychological role in gaining respect. And people automatically if you see somebody in a white collar walking around, everybody's always, being nice to them and talking, automatically, if he wore a plaid shirt, he wouldn't get that automatic respect. And so, I think that's kind of what I would use as an example in our day as compared to what he sees. So I think it was his vulnerability that put him in that particular position. He says that the whole literary activity turns on the problem of becoming a Christian in Christendom. So this is where he's been kind of speaking about this issue. It's not trying to convert the non-believer or the unbeliever, the atheist or even the agnostic. He's trying to convert the so-called Christians in Christendom, the ones who've joined but have no real ambition to do any more than follow the rituals. And that's what he's trying to reach these people here, who've started, but then they've, as Paul says, he says, I think it was the Galatians, he says, who do you think you are that you've started out in faith and now you're going to finish the work yourself? I think this is kind of the same idea that he's saying, the church in Denmark has started out in faith and now they're trying to finish it themselves, and this isn't right. And so this is his ministry. He admits that he himself learned as he wrote. In other words, he was his own student, so to speak. He would use these times of meditation and learn from his own meditation. So it's not just us that have gained benefit. He probably gained benefit of his own works. And I think it's a good attitude for any writer or a teacher that when you go into the field, expect to learn yourself. You're still a student. Even though you may be titled teacher, you're still a student. You ought to be a student. It's important.
Well, that's the great example that, and I think Kierkegaard likely got that perspective from the example of Socrates, right?
Yeah.
Is right? Is that Socrates knew how little that he knew, right?
Yeah.
He wasn't trying to profess a positive doctrine. Mm-hmm. He was constantly seeking the truth to the big questions.
Right.
And it's not like he had some sort of big doctrine that he was trying to impose on everybody else.
Right. I think his strength, wasn't he the one who he kind of taught by showing everybody how ignorant they were, by asking them to explain what they meant when they would say something.
Well, this is and we've talked about this before about I'll say it is a never-ending reward to study the parallels between Socrates and Jesus Christ, and Kierkegaard for that matter too. Just to think about if there is this sort of providence in history, the role of Socrates in the unfolding of that history and how necessary he was in this sort of deflationary move to kind of take and sap all the energy out of so many different pagan conceptions of the world, so that essentially the stage could be cleared for the positive truth of Jesus Christ. And this very odd idea that a man could be truth, because all other objective conceptions of truth have been utterly exhausted, and that's perfectly personified in the conflict between Pilate and Jesus right before he's executed, where Pilate asks Jesus, right, what is truth?
Yeah.
And Pilate can't answer it.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And Jesus sort of has to allude to the fact that he is the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think philosophy has brought us to that point today, with their failure over all the centuries, failure to come up with truth. And a lot of people are disillusioned now with philosophy because they could not come to that very basic idea of truth. If you can't come to what is truth, how do you claim anything? And so there's a lot of
and that's the big program of what Kierkegaard's trying to convey through his authorship is that how much the philosophical systems are sandcastles. Or castles in the sky. They are beautiful to look at, but they're wisps, or they're easily washed away when the tide comes in or the wind blows.
Okay, now we go to the epilogue on page 193. So you know we're getting to the end when we hit the epilogue. He tells us what he lost. He lost every worldly form of the interesting. He lost the interesting distinction of being a possibility. He lost the interesting ability of being an enigma. And this is a little difficult to kind of explain, so I'm kind of taking a shot at it here. I think he means that he lost his sense of the mysterious here. People no longer saw him as interesting because he's now portraying himself as the religious. So
they thought he was they reduced him to a fanatic.
Yeah.
And I can relate to this. And I was telling you this off camera earlier.
Yeah.
Right? Like I was telling Bob earlier, I feel like I'm personally going through my own sort of Corsair affair, as a result, like rather than take Kierkegaard seriously, because if they did take his ideas seriously, it would cause some sort of existential crisis for them. They'd really have to do this inward development that he's been trying to prod people towards during his entire authorship. And rather than do that, they just say, he's a zealot. you know, and stereotype him and make him one-dimensional. And there's nothing right? Do I have this right? There's nothing mysterious about someone that you can stereotype.
Right.
You just make them look like a lunatic.
Yeah. That's how you can negate that. He lost the interesting distinction that the problem was and is how to become a Christian. So, can you imagine him now pulling the gloves off and trying to tell people they're not really Christians and they need to make a different change in their lives? Certainly it's not going to make him popular. You can understand if you go around and make that claim today in Christendom, you can understand how people have. The only way to shut him up is to make him sound insane, to make him sound like a fool. So, again, he comes out on the short end here. He has lost this in the eyes of the crowd or in the eyes of the world. He was not very interesting to the public because the public is always looking for something new and something interesting. And when he started out with his books, Luke, he had a little popularity because he was a novelty. But he kind of lost the novelty when he got serious about his works. And they didn't like that. There is a kind of a biblical saying that they have itching ears, always wanting to hear something that is a novel idea. But Kierkegaard was beyond that at this point. So I think he's trying to reflect upon how the crowd turned against him when he showed them that the truth about himself, rather than being a dilettante, and that he tried to create for the purposes, that he tried to create this image of himself as a dilettante, and then that was only done because he was trying to gain their trust as an aesthetic. And so this was the show that he was kind of putting on. When he changed over and turned over into the religious is when he lost their interest. Okay. So he wants us to understand that it's really a momentous decision to become a Christian. He says that being a Christian is not something that you become because of reflection. In other words, you don't reflect yourself into being a Christian. It's not like you go into the right state of meditation like one might reach nirvana if you have the right pillow and the right position, and if you meditate in just the right way, you will reach nirvana. Christianity is not like that. Self-reflection is not the means by which you become a Christian. It's still something that is it's not something that comes through reflection, but revelation. So I think he's trying to tell us that being a Christian is like coming out of the world. It's a transformation from one state to another. And in this case, his state is from the aesthetic to the religious. He says that you have to break the semblance of being a Christian. And what he means there is that you have to break from the imitation of what one perceives as being a Christian to actually being one. This is the mask, the disguise, or this is the artificial Christian, the make-believe Christian. They imitate what it means to be a Christian. It's like, I'm trying to think of what they're called again. A sociopath. They have no real feelings of themselves. So they imitate everybody as to what it means to be a real human being. And I think there's people in Christianity that are like that see what other Christians are doing around them, and then they try to imitate that. And he's trying to stop that. He sees it in his day. And he's saying, no, this is unacceptable. We have to become authentic individuals, not members of the crowd, which is what we talked about.
You can see why it would be so upsetting to individuals if Kierkegaard was going around and saying you're a fake Christian. right?
Yeah.
Because they're like, this is the interesting thing about the distinction between the imitation and the authentic Christian, is that the person that is a mime of what Christianity actually is, they don't, in a lot of ways, they don't have the consciousness to know that they are nothing but an imitation. Mm-hmm. So to them, they've mistaken the imitation for the real thing. And I know this as someone who has been there, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. Who has gone through all the motions of being a Christian, checked the box on a Christian, told other people I was a Christian, and then it was sort of brought to my attention how far away I was from the true ideal. Mm-hmm. And it's very, even today, it's very irritating. I'll talk to other people who self-identify as Christians, and they see something about my own behavior, and they will rebuke me, mm-hmm. right? And it's very irritating. It's very irritating. And so I can understand why there would be such this backlash to Kierkegaard, because it's not, no one wants to be told that they're a phony. Mm-hmm. But how do you, the trick is, right, is like, and he's talked about this throughout this book, is how do you, without reinforcing the illusion, show people that they're not authentically committed to the ideal that they profess?
Yeah, and the difficulty is for him and for us is that you can't do it by telling someone that. You have to help them to find it themselves. How do you help somebody find out that they're an imitation? That's so very difficult. But
what do you think, after we've done this book and so much Kierkegaard, what do you think the answer is? Well, there's not going to be one answer, right? But we should have some concrete things that we can say about it, right?
Yeah, I think the answer is the best way to reveal the imitation is by being the authentic.
Right,
so
I agree.
Our job is to be the authentic Christian, and that way it will reveal the true from the false.
It's never occurred to me that you're a phony Christian. The thoughts never entered my mind. So, from my vantage point, it seems like you're living the ideal.
Well,
I don't think I've ever thought to myself. I don't think it's ever crossed my mind like that Bob's a phony.
Well, and likewise, Luke. Really, I know that you are authentic. I know you don't think you've arrived at where you want to be, but none of us have. You are on your way, though, and that's what's important, as we all are on our way. But I'm very proud of you and where you're at right now, and I'll say that publicly. Very proud of you.
It's been a lot of work. It's a lot of struggle.
I know, it's a pleasure to be associated with you. So now. He believes that he did perform a service for Christianity by doing all of this. And he was always in the service of Christianity and just wanted to bring people into true Christianity. That was his goal. That was his ministry. And he didn't need to go to the jungles of Africa or the Amazon in order to be an evangelist or a missionary. He found being a missionary right in the middle of Denmark a necessity.
In present day America, we're presented with limitless opportunities to evangelize to people here. Mm-hmm. Just like when you're getting coffee and you're talking to the cashier. Mm-hmm. Some people, I guess, would think that would be a pretty radical fundamentalist thing. I guess but I don't know. I feel like people are starving for a meaningful conversation, and I think if you can meet them where they're at, there's just countless opportunities to really reach people right here, right now, and where you live.
There absolutely are, and you bring up one of the simplest, but just every time you interact with somebody, cashiers or whatever, saying a nice word to them helps to gain their trust, helps to gain their confidence that you have something, you have that extra string on your guitar, Luke.
Maybe one day we'll all be singing the Song of Moses and the Song of the Lamb.
Uh-huh.
Maybe we're just getting tuned up for that big song. You know what I'm talking about?
I do. Now, he felt that his book, The Concluding Postscript, was a turning point when he actually changed his writing style from the aesthetic to the religious. So that's when, if you follow his reading and you read them sequentially, that's when he actually made the turn as to not that he converted at this point, don't misunderstand, but rather that he began to try to reach the church from this new point of view now, from the aesthetic to the religious point of view, and try to draw those people who now he already had, hopefully following him, into the religious. He says that the way, in quotes, is not from the simple into the system or speculation, but rather from the system or speculation back to the simple. This is Kierkegaard in one sentence, right? To take people from speculation into the simple. And that's what he tried to do. And of course, Hegel is the unspoken philosopher here. Probably he's focusing on the king of systematic thinking, but also systematic theology. I don't know if you've ever read a book on systematic theology, Luke. It would be kind of an experience to see how people have thought that they've been able to write all the truths together so that they all mesh and they all agree with one another, and then present it as my theology. And Kierkegaard says that's a waste of time. Christianity.
Well, you know the best.
Go ahead.
You know the best example of that is that. And when I was in grad school, I worked through a pretty sizable portion of the Summa Theologica.
Oh, yes.
Or Theologica, or however you pronounce it. It's St. Thomas Aquinas' work. But it never escaped my attention that I believe towards the end of St. Thomas Aquinas' life, he had a mystical vision and collapsed and pretty much said, like, I'll have to look it up to see what he actually said, but I think something to the effect that everything that he had written was straw in comparison to that vision that he had.
That's pretty accurate. That's just about what he said.
Let me look up the exact quote so people can be edified by it. But
I think it's a Summa Theologica. I think is what it was, but yeah, double check that. He admits that he really wasn't an aesthete who converted into being a Christian, but that he had a predisposition to becoming a Christian all along. So it's not necessarily that you start out as an aesthete. You start out as a non-believer, then you become an aesthete, and then you become a religious Christian. But so he's not saying that's necessarily the steps that you have to go through, but he's just kind of picking up at that point because he sees Christendom at that point. And he's trying to grab those people who are the aesthetes and lead them into the religious form of Christianity. He realizes how far he is from being perfect, but he knows that he isn't a completed work yet. But let me add to this, that it's important that we all can say to ourselves, we are an incomplete work. We're not yet finished. But this is not an excuse to follow in sin. It's not like, well, I'm still a sinner because I'm incomplete. This isn't what he's saying. It isn't what Paul says. Paul always refers to us as the holy ones of God. So it's a different way of thinking. And I try to teach this almost as frequently as I can to my class, that stop thinking of yourselves as sinners. Start thinking of yourselves as the holy ones of God. You're saved from that kind of a life for a reason, and that's to worship God and to worship Him as a clean vessel, not as a dirty vessel. So, just trying to make that point clear. he hopes that the reader now knows the kind of author he is, and that history will treat him kindly. And it did. It took over 100 years to get there, but I think he's admired by a lot of people. Even non-believers, I think, admire him. There's more and more people now that come up to me and ask about him and where they can begin, how they could start reading Kierkegaard. And some of the questions, is he really that difficult to understand? And the answer is, most of the time, yes, he really is. He is a study. You really have to jump in and become acquainted. But the more you do, the more you understand, and the easier it becomes. One of the ways, though, just thinking, one of the ways that has helped me to understand him is to understand him through myself. When he talks about others, I take that personally and try to search myself to find those negative qualities in me that can be improved upon. And that's one way to understand him, is don't be afraid to relate to him in the negative, to say, maybe he's talking about me here. I think that can be an asset. You wanted to say something?
Well, yeah, I found I just wanted to share that I had found the exact quotation that St. Thomas Aquinas had said. I didn't realize this, but just to relate back to what we were saying earlier about systematic theology, I didn't realize I think he had just turned 50 or was about 50 when he stopped writing. So he had a lot of life in him still. It wasn't like he was 75.
Yeah. Careful, Luke.
And,
Luke, be careful with the 75, all right?
Okay. Bob, you are eternally 35 in my mind.
Thank you.
So, yeah, I consider you a peer. I've never once noticed a discrepancy in age.
Okay.
But apparently Aquinas' brother Reginald kept asking for an explanation about why he stopped writing, and Thomas Aquinas said, I adjure you by the living Almighty God and by the faith you have in our order and by charity that you strictly promise me you will never reveal in my lifetime what I tell you. Everything that I have written seems like straw to me compared to those things that I have seen and have been revealed to me. So that's the actual quote.
Yeah.
I just wanted to share. And yes, I too, very obviously, I relate so much to Kierkegaard that obviously I have a finger puppet with Kierkegaard. And I've shared this story before. I have a friend who calls me Lukagard.
Lukagard?
So, yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. And he tells us with this little book, he concludes his authorship. So this is his, I don't know, was this his final book, The Point of View for My Work as an Author? Did he do anything after this?
I think it depends on how we define final. The moment, which I've done some work on before for Noetic, I've taught like 2 or 3 sections of it or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that's considered a posthumous work.
Oh, okay.
Because he so I think the last installment was like ready to go to the printers or to the editor, like on his desk, and he had died. So I think it really is a question of how we define final work.
Wasn't this book also published after his death, though? I forget. I can look it up while you're talking. Okay, yeah, I thought that we mentioned that in the introduction. It was written in 1848, published in 1859. So 4 years after his death. Yeah, I just found it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Let me look at the authorship timeline. I think that's way after the moment, but keep going.
Okay. He confirms that there would not have been any comfort for him except that he was in the faith. And I think that this is a good overview of his attitude towards his life in general. If it wasn't for his faith, I think there would have been no comfort for him. I don't think he would have got comfort from psychology or philosophy. I think he found faith was his comfort, as do I, and I know you do too, Luke. Now we get to the conclusion on page 100. He tells us that he suffered as a genius in a provincial town. The standard he set for others was too great for his contemporaries to meet. That almost sounds like he's bragging here, but if you've read enough Kierkegaard, you know this is just him really being honest. That he set such a high standard for everybody that they couldn't meet it. People were puzzled by his extraordinary talent, and they needed some kind of an explanation of it. Then they decided where it came from. It came from his pride, and that's what gave him his talent. So they also explained their maltreatment of him as punishment for his pride. So this is kind of one of those circular reasoning, self-fulfilling prophecies. How come Kierkegaard is so genius? It's his pride. Well, we need to punish him for his pride then. So it justified their ill treatment of him. As a child, others couldn't even keep up with him when he was younger. Usually the child is moved up. In school, if a child is smarter, what they do is they move him up to a higher class. But in his case, there was only one class. It was the temporal. In other words, he existed as a human being. How are they going to move him up above a human being?
You needed to graduate to heaven.
Yeah, he needs to make it all the way. He gave up a lot and he suffered a lot to be the kind of writer that he was, but he did not consider himself to be a martyr. We could call him a martyr in the sense that he gave up everything. He didn't die as like a martyr does, but his whole life was kind of, he gave his whole life up for God, for Christ. He felt that he took his sufferings and transformed them into a treasure for eternity through his writings. And I would agree with that. I'd say he absolutely did. Through his suffering, we learned. And that brings back a quote from Hebrews chapter 5, verses 8 and 9. It said, though he were a son, yet he learned obedience by the things he suffered. And being made perfect, he became the author of eternal salvation unto all that obey him. So learning through your suffering is not uncommon. Christ learned through his sufferings. And Kierkegaard is claiming that he also learned through his sufferings. So if we learn through our sufferings, that's good. And so kind of comes back to that answer is should we go out in the community if it's only going to bring heartache and suffering? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I need to be better about it. I have an answer on this life works timeline of Kierkegaard, which I think you might find interesting. Do you mind if I share it real quick?
Please, go ahead.
So, according to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, 4 works came out in 1855, the year of Kierkegaard's death. He died on November 11th, 1855.
Okay.
And the one that I referenced, they're including as one of these 4. Their translation of it is the instant. I called it the moment.
Oh, okay.
But there are 3 others, and I don't know if you've heard of these or if we've covered them at some point, and maybe we need to, because I like late Kierkegaard. He's very salty. But he had one text called "This Must Be Said, So Let It Be Said," and he assigned his name to that. And this one looks very intriguing. Christ's Judgment on Official Christianity by S. Kierkegaard. Oh. And then also he gets into divine attributes, God's Unchangeability, a discourse by S. Kierkegaard.
His immutability. Yeah. Are those in English? Are they available in English?
I do not know. Why don't I look that up? But yeah, this has been a very research-heavy episode for me.
Well, you bring up these great questions. Yeah, those.
Well, you're right. You're right that this is one that what we're reading here was one of the last published ones. Even though there are other ones that were published in 1855. So this is significantly after he died. Okay. Let me look up.
You go ahead.
God's. Yeah.
Do that with one ear and listen with the other, Luke.
Sure.
Okay, he's not going to be ashamed when he meets those glorious ones in eternity, he tells us. So he's looking forward to eternity. He feels like Paul said, I've finished the race. I've run the race and I finished it. He did the best he could. And I think Kierkegaard feels the same way. At this point, he's late in life and he's almost on his deathbed and saying that I've run the race and I finished it. And I can't wait to get to eternity. He himself was that individual, in quotes, and he became more of an individual. So we have to think, what does he mean here when he says he's become more of an individual? Do you think that he means that he's become more independent of groupthink and more independent of the crowd mentality and crowd control and the desire to please the crowd? So I will check with you back in a little while to answer that question, Luke. We'll revisit that one.
Okay.
He carried to completion the work that he was given in reflection. He uses the term now, reflection, as what it means to become a Christian. So it's not, this sounds almost like a contradiction here. It's not that we become a Christian because we go through this reflective state. It's not that brings us to Christianity, as though we can do that without revelation. But true reflection includes revelation, perhaps brings about revelation, which is the means that we actually become a Christian. And he says this here, his purity of heart was to will only one thing, and he would never give in and reduce the price of what it took to become a Christian. Now, this whole statement here, his purity of heart was to will only one thing, is a direct quotation of the title of purity of heart is to will one thing. And I'm sure this was no accident. And if we remember, what is that one thing that we will? And that is to will the will of God. Now, I recently brought this up in my Bible study class. What it meant to have purity of heart is to will one thing. And I got a lot of puzzled looks on their face, so I kind of kept it under my sleeve, the quotation that what the answer is to will the will of God. But when I finally told them that, their mouths dropped. They said, wow. Is that what faith is? And I said, yes. It's to will the will of God. And everybody wrote that down, copiously in their notes. It's such a simple and yet such an astonishing idea how we look at Christianity and how we look at our relationship to God and the role that our will plays. I tell them that you can't will yourself into becoming a Christian, which is what most people try to do. You have to will the will of God, and that's what makes you a Christian.
The truth's not complicated, is it? It only seems complicated because the society at large has intoxicated us in such a way that when we hear the truth like that, it seems impossible.
Yeah.
But it's actually pretty straightforward. It's not, I'm not saying that there aren't mysteries and that the Bible makes total sense if you read it on your first try. Obviously there are paradoxes and complications. That's a big part of Kierkegaard's authorship. But there's a lot of unnecessary complication just because the culture is so far from this very simple truth of the gospel.
Problem is
to live for God. I mean, what organ of society is communicating that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are the Golden Globes communicating that? Is the national championship football game communicating this? I mean, it's completely antithetical to all the messages of the world.
Well, Luke, the thing is, we don't want to do it. We want to explain it.
Yeah.
And that's why we look to philosophy and psychology to say, okay, what does it mean? What does that mean to will the will of God? It must have a meaning. It must have some definition that I can write down and bring around with me and memorize it. It doesn't need a definition. It's just do it. Like the motto of these sneaker
Nike
commercials. Yeah, I didn't want to give them a free plug, but since you're the CEO, you can do it. But yeah, just
I'll say that people should look into the meaning of the Nike swoosh and its association with the planet Saturn.
Yes.
So not
okay,
but Bob, that would be a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, it would be. So the idea is to will the will of God, and it doesn't need a definition. It just needs us to do it. Okay, so let's backtrack here, Luke. What does it mean when?
Hey, can I?
Oh,
hey,
did you cut?
Hey, Kate. Can I share some stuff?
Do please.
Sorry, I didn't mean to hey you too much,
No.
but I don't forget. So I went and did a little research here. Okay.
Yes.
And it's this one of these texts from 1855, the changelessness of God, a discourse. That can be found in Walter Lowry's translation of For Self-Examination, which is on our list of books to do.
Oh, okay.
So it is found in that translation. Let's see. What Christ judges of official Christianity is an introduction to the attack upon Christendom. We can also look at that in Articles from the Fatherland. Apparently this was something that was composed in between installments of the instant or the moment, depending on what you call it. And similarly, this must be said, so let it be said, is also in the introduction to the attack upon Christendom, or see the Articles from the Fatherland. Mm-hmm. So, Articles from the Fatherland and For Self-Examination is where we can find these three other obscure final writings of Kierkegaard that I made reference to earlier.
Okay, so they sounded pretty interesting. Well, you will have to definitely put them on.
That changelessness of God one is, I like that.
Yes, that is an interesting subject. So now, what do you think he means that he became more of an individual?
I mean, yes, the answer that you intimated earlier is he's less controlled by groupthink. But I mean, ultimately, to become more of an individual is to become more of a receptacle of the Holy Spirit.
Very well said.
Right?
Very well said.
Yes. But then the person who's not in religious categories will like, well, how are you more of an individual if you're just sublimating yourself into God's being? And I just want to say, I don't know, dude. Just try it out. Experiment with it. See what happens. You tell me if you're more of an individual when you let God fill you up.
Yep.
You will be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very well said. Now, at the end, we're getting into the last few paragraphs here. He brought to completion the dialectical structure. That's going to take a little bit of discussion here. I think he means that he's given us all a logical conclusion of the present state of mankind in his need for God and his relationship with him. So he's brought this all to a logical conclusion. He's given us an answer. It may not be the answer we're looking for, but it's a logical conclusion that he derives from all of this. Like the answer to purity of heart is to will the will of God. It's a conclusion. It may not be the answer we're looking for. He did not want to take full credit for this work, but he wanted to give it to governance or to God's power. So he didn't want to try to tell us like another philosopher would say, I've studied all my books and I've come to this logical conclusion on my own, and here's the answer. What Kierkegaard is saying, no, not taking credit for it. This was given to me by revelation, not by willpower. So I think that's what he's getting at here. And my final quote from this book, bottom of page 103. He says, and I'm going to pick it up from a little bit below the midpoint. It says, the dialectical structure he brought to completion, of which the several parts are whole works, he could not ascribe to any man. Least of all would he ascribe it to himself. If he were to ascribe it to anyone, it would be to governance, to whom it was in fact ascribed, day after day, year after year, by the author who historically died of a mortal disease, but poetically died of longing for eternity, where uninterruptedly he would have nothing else to do but to thank God.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah, that's kind of the last little section of this, and I don't know if we should interpret it. It's kind of nice to let it stand on its own. But if you have some words that you would like to...
Can I read it too? Just because it was so beautiful. I mean,
yeah.
I don't want to steal your thunder, but I just want to... I don't know why I feel compelled to read it aloud again. It was so good, I just want to hear it again.
Yeah.
The dialectical structure he brought to completion, of which the several parts are whole works, he could not ascribe to any man, least of all would he ascribe it to himself. If he were to ascribe it to anyone, it would be to governance, to whom it was in fact ascribed day after day and year after year by the author who historically died of a mortal disease, but poetically died of longing for eternity, where uninterruptedly he would have nothing else to do but to thank God.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, why I want to read it, I wanted to hear is poetically died of longing for eternity.
Yes, and that.
I want to hang out with God.
Yeah.
There's so many things. There's so many things.
Yeah.
I want to be with God, and I want Him to. I so desire to understand so many mysteries, and I very much relate to that poetic longing to be with God.
Yeah, I didn't write down the quote. It didn't come to me until just now from Paul, and a kind of more of a paraphrase than a quotation, where he says, I long to, I'm torn between these two ideas, to stay here with you or to be with Christ.
Right.
He longed to be with Christ. I think that's the measure of being a Christian.
Right.
Well, we need to be able to get to that place that we want to be with Christ, and where we're torn to say, I love my life, I love everything about my life, yet I want to be with Christ too. And he's actually torn between the two. And I think that's what Kierkegaard is saying, the same thing in his own way, in his own words, right?
So both you, me, and Kierkegaard poetically long to be with Christ. Okay?
Yeah.
This is a good litmus test, and I think you're right. Like, this is a good sign of, I guess, what authentic Christianity is like. It sounds sort of morbid to someone outside of our conversation. They'd be like, "Oh man, all these guys have death wishes,"
Yeah.
Like they want to escape from reality because they got too much heaven on their minds. But Kierkegaard talks about poetically longing to be with God because he wants to sing the praises of God, which I'm not opposed to. I'm down for that. But for me, part of the reason why I want to be with God so much is it's so obvious to me how fragile human understanding is.
Yeah.
It's so obvious to me how much we don't know. And it's so obvious to me how much deception there is in this world. And I feel like the only entity, the only person, if we want to call God a person or Christ a person, that could deliver me into knowledge, it is Christ. So I just have so many things I want, finality and conclusion. I hate to say this, I almost want to die so I can get the answers. Does that sound? Is that messed up to say that?
Well, I think that Christ's presence appears in the form of answers, but I think once you get there, Luke, I don't think you're going to want the answers. I think just being with him is going to be sufficient.
Do you think when we die, the answers are just implanted in us? Like, oh, okay, we know now.
I think he is the answer. I think it's going to be like that.
But don't you want to know? Don't you want to know like why Christ, had us get up on our crosses? Like why us?
I want to know now, but I think when we're there, we're not.
You think it'll fade away?
Yeah. Let me read you. I found it. It's Philippians 1:23, but it starts a little earlier. I'll start with verse 20. It's I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage, so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I am to go on living in the body, this will mean fruitful labor for me. Yet, what shall I choose? I do not know. I'm torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is far better, but it is more necessary for you that I remain in the body. So that's just, I hope we can arrive at that. I hope that is the litmus test of a Christian. That's something we should strive for, to get to that point. I'm so glad and encouraged to hear that you've kind of arrived there. I think that's very encouraging.
I think the big revelation for me was, I think the big revelation for me in that was understanding the true nature of this world that we live in, and I know, it's not a pleasant thought to think, but when you understand who really runs this place, this realm of existence, it doesn't, I mean, ultimately God is totally in control, but it's a finer theological conversation about who is the God, small g, of this world right now, and how so many people and institutions are in control of very good people.
Yeah.
And
so that concludes our session. I think we ended on a very high note this time.
Yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough for being the authoritative master teacher during our seminar series on this text, because that has freed me up to make so many innovations with the platform and really accelerate the Noetic platform. And hopefully, once I get everything sorted out financially and legally, I'll be able to spearhead the discussions. And I just can't thank you enough for covering for me while I pretend to be a CEO. So,
well, it helps me to, being the teacher is like we were saying, I have to be my own student, and I have been. I've learned a lot by teaching. So.
Yeah. Well, you performed the task excellently, and I do agree. You ended on a high note. We all did. I guess we should bring this to a close. For those who are playing along at home, you can find this on my YouTube channel, Luke Johnson. You can write me at philosophyluke@gmail.com, and I'm going to put our email addresses in the description box below. I know Bob asked me to figure out a way that people could find our email addresses and get in touch with us. I'll start doing that.
Excellent.
And if you have any questions, it'll be up on SoundCloud and the first iteration of the Noetic app until we make the big public launch for version 2.0. You guys are going to love version 2.0, but it's a monster. So just be patient with me, and you can beta test the new version of the website, although it's got a lot of flaws still. Noetic.online, and just bear with me. I don't got a lot of money. I don't got a lot of resources. No one's ever tried to make something like this before, so it's gonna be a process. So just bear with me. But 2018 is gonna be a big year. So and we've got a lot of great materials for you over there. So without further ado, I guess I'll bring this to a close. Thank you, Bob.
Okay, thank you.